looking over our Sandman comics by Neil Gaiman, it made me think back to when I first got into Sandman. Now, I was going to this comic store in Hamden, Connecticut at the time, where I had my pull box called the Nostalgia Shop. And one of the employees there, his name is Paul, he was one of the ones that got me hooked on Animal Man, because he said, "Oh, you're reading Swamp Thing? You got to read this comic called Animal Man." And this is pre-Vertigo stamping. He was another person that liked the fringe universe of DC very much. And when Sandman was announced, he said, "Hey, this is the same guy that wrote Black Orchid," which I love Black Orchid.
Oh yeah, that was great.
And he said, you got to read this book too, put it in your pull box. I said, "Sure, I will." And when I did, I read the first issue. I enjoyed it, but since I wasn't so much a DC fan, I didn't have much background in DC Comics, certain aspects of it, I just didn't have that history. I didn't understand it as well as I could have. So what we did during that time period, we went over each other's house, and I went over this guy, Paul's place, and he had a bunch of DC Comics, and he goes, "Here, this helps reading this helps understanding this." So yes, Sandman is its own realm, but especially early on, it is established in the DC universe.
That's what I like about it.
And what's your experience with Sandman, Cutie?
I remember seeing Neil Gaiman at Dragon Con. This was back in the early 90s. And I had never read Sandman at the time, but I saw him do a panel on it. And it was just very interesting the way he talked about how it's one of the few comics at the times that was for adults, and it was something that was it was a very intelligent comic for the time.
And that's why we both love Sandman, the series. And even though it lasted 75 issues, but it was stopped, they ceased production of it, not because of poor sales, but because Neil Gaiman said, "That's it. This is the story that needs to be told. It's done." And it's bittersweet having a comic book series like that, because you want more, but it is finite. So they ended on a high note. So we're going to begin our discussion by tracing the roots of Sandman. And then we'll talk about the various characters that are in the DC universe that Neil Gaiman incorporated into the Sandman mythos. And it mainly, when we were discussing it, just passively talking about comics, like we do on a regular basis, we found it necessary that in order to really understand Sandman, it helps to understand a little bit of background of some things in the DC universe.
We will begin our discussion by tracing the roots of the Sandman. Then we will talk about the various characters that are in the DC universe that Gaiman incorporated into the Sandman mythos. The original Sandman was created 80 years ago and actually appeared before Batman. Now referred to as the Golden Age Sandman, his name derived from folklore, who was said to bring pleasant dreams to those who are sleeping by sprinkling sand in the corners of their eyes. The first two appearances were in New York World's Fair Comics number 1 and Adventure Comics number 40 from 1939. Wesley Dodds was attired in a gas mask and green business suit. The Sandman used a sleeping gas gun to sedate criminals. He was originally one of the mystery men, such as the Shadow and the Crimson Avenger, to appear in comic books and other types of adventure fiction in the 1930s. His adventures would later be chronicled in Vertigo Comics' Sandman Mystery Theater.
Now, I remember when Sandman Mystery Theater came out, I was excited because, we're going back, I didn't have a background in understanding the older DC characters or the Justice Society of America or anything like that. So this actually it was a more noir twist, a very adult-themed series of what was going on in the 1920s, 30s, 40s. That era, it was, you could essentially say it's like a diesel punk type comic.
That was an excellent series. Due to the popularity of Batman in 1941, he was outfitted with a cowl and unitard costume in Adventure Comics number 69, as he developed into a superhero. He also acquired his sidekick Sandy and founded the Justice Society of America.
So essentially they were taking this character that was a standalone character, but because of the trend of the times, moving him into a quote-unquote superhero role. What happened next?
The next generation of comic book readers were introduced to a new Sandman that was created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. Sandman number 1 premiered in 1974 and was originally intended to be the actual Sandman of popular myth, eternal and immortal, despite his superhero-like appearance and adventures. The Sandman is assisted by Brute and Glob, living nightmares whom he released with the help of a magic whistle. Using security monitoring devices, the Sandman can enter the dream stream or the reality stream, in which he acts like the superhero he looks like. And he carries a pouch of dream dust with which he can cause anyone to sleep and dream. The Sandman's main task is protecting children from nightmare monsters within their dreams. In Wonder Woman issue 300, cover dated 1983, he was revealed as Garrett Sanford, and this issue makes references to sexual dreams and has Sanford admit to observing Diana's dreams inappropriately.
Okay, so let's talk about that. When you were reading the era of Golden Age Sandman and then comparing it to the Jack Kirby Sandman, what did you think about those comics?
The Golden Age wasn't really as good to me. I think I like the more modern one.
And what did you think about that Jack Kirby era, that early 70s Sandman, where he was the Sandman of mythos, but in a superhero costume? What did you think about that iteration?
It was fun to read. I know that's not really what he became later, but just to see it there, you just sort of, he fits in. He does seem to fit with the others, right?
And what did you think about those creatures, Brute and Glob?
They were weird. This leads us to Justice League of America, annual number 1, where the Sandman was appointed as an honorary member and fought Dr. Destiny, who had trapped Sanford in a tube like those used for Brute and Glob, and eventually the Justice League as well.
Now, being a Justice League fan, I know that you enjoyed that era. What did you think about Sandman in that scenario?
That was interesting, yeah, with Dr. Destiny and that saying that he was not able to dream and he was making everyone else have these dreams.
And so we're seeing the transition early on. He's a person with no super abilities, but running around masked, just like Batman was. But now we're seeing it as a member or involved in the Justice League of someone that's of super abilities. So this was the idea of using that name Sandman has transitioned, and we're going to see this mentioned in the Sandman Neil Gaiman series. And so looking at it from a person like me that didn't have a background in DC, don't you see how I found confusion in the first issue reading it, not knowing this background?
Yeah, it kind of helps if you know the background.
What else happened?
In Infinity Incorporated number 50, it is revealed that Sanford had since gone insane due to the loneliness of the dream dimension and committed suicide, and that the son of Carter Hall the Hawkman has now supplanted the deceased Sanford as the Sandman and was in fact using Sanford's body after his own was taken by the Silver Scarab.
So even though the Sandman series by Neil Gaiman was considered a mature reader's title, during this era of the late 80s, we see the superhero, quote-unquote, version of the Sandman did have adult themes. I mean, inappropriate thoughts about Wonder Woman was brought up, right? Mm-hmm. That's crazy, isn't it?
It is. It's just like the Watchmen having adult themes and...
Yeah, and now you're dealing with issues of suicide. Like, how did I not know about this character? Well, I didn't know about this character because I didn't read DC superhero comics so much. But, man, how smart was Neil Gaiman to be able to take aspects of this character and incorporate them into his series.
Now we come to Dr. Destiny. John Dee has the ability to manipulate anyone's dreams. Basically, Dr. Destiny can use twisted versions of dreams to command crimes. He can, for example, make people become murderers by exploiting their secret dreams, since in dreams we are all uninhibited. He can also explore a particular person's dream to create a kind of dream world where everything happens based on a misrepresented version of that dream and send people there. His name is almost certainly a reference to the real-world John Dee, who lived in the late 1500s and was an Anglo-Welsh mathematician, astronomer, astrologer, and occult philosopher who spent much time on alchemy and divination.
And you mentioned that Dr. Destiny was in that Justice League annual.
Yes, he was the main villain. And isn't this similar to the Nightmare on Elm Street movies? They must have gotten the idea from this.
Yeah, I never thought about that before, Freddy Krueger. I could see that. Yeah,
yes.
That's a good point. All right, what else?
The three appear in the form of any group of three women, usually the mother, the maiden, and the crone, the three aspects of the triple goddesses in many mythologies. Sometimes they appear in the form of the three witches from DC's former anthology, The Witching Hour, Mildred, Mordred, and Cynthia.
All right, so that's something that I was familiar with because it dealt with mythology, the three witches. And so, yes, it was in DC Comics. You mentioned that horror anthology, and we have some of those Witching Hour comics. I mean, do you like those DC anthologies, those horror ones? I like them a lot.
Yeah, I think that they're really good. I mean, I was never really much into scary stuff as a child, but I can kind of tolerate it more now and appreciate it. It does have some good writing.
And this was, when you talk about House of Mystery, House of Secrets, those are comic books that my grandfather would get. So I remember them through reading his as opposed to me picking up my own. But all those DC horror comics were fantastic. And seeing how, yes, they incorporated areas of mythology into the comics, but then Neil Gaiman is taking these characters, kind of like Crypt Keeper was for Tales of the Crypt. They more set up the stories. How Neil Gaiman was able to take those characters and weave them in to the dream realm and to his storyline, I thought was fascinating that he's using established DC characters as well. Because there were some others that were Neil Gaiman used from those horror anthologies. Isn't that true?
Yes. Cain, Abel, Lucian, Eve, and Destiny. Originally, they were the respective hosts of the DC horror comic anthologies. Cain resided in the House of Mystery, Abel in the House of Secrets, where they owned a large green gargoyle named Gregor, and Lucian in the Ghost Castle. Eve was the principal host of Secrets of the Sinister House, and later in Weird Mystery Tales. Destiny appears as a blind man dressed in gray or brown robes, carrying a large book, the Cosmic Log. The book is chained to him, and within the book is written the entire sum of existence, past, present, and future. He was introduced as the later host of Weird Mystery Tales.
Okay, so out of those characters, it's amazing that everyone was a host, including Destiny, but Destiny became one of the Endless. As I was reading the Sandman comic, I didn't realize that Neil Gaiman did not create Destiny. He created the other Endless, but not him.
Yes, that's fascinating how he incorporated this character.
And there were a couple characters that Neil Gaiman pulled from the Swamp Thing universe and brought those characters into his universe. Who were they?
Matthew the Raven. Matthew was originally Matthew Cable, a longtime supporting character in the Swamp Thing series, but because he died while asleep in the Dreaming, he was offered the chance to become a Dream Raven and serve Dream if he wished, and he accepted.
And again, reading the Swamp Thing comics at the same time as the Sandman comics, it all really tied together and made sense in the late 1980s.
John Constantine. in which he acted as a supernatural advisor to the Swamp Thing and was depicted as a sorcerer of questionable morality. And of course, some of these have been brought to life on TV. John Constantine had his own short-lived TV series, and then I believe he showed up on like Legends of Tomorrow and Arrow. And then, of course, we have the TV show Lucifer, which we love, which also came from Sandman.
There's a lot to Sandman before and afterwards. I can't wait to dig into more Sandman comics.
Thanks for listening. Make sure you hit that subscribe button and join our Facebook group. Live long, and may the Force be with you. Nanu Nanu.